My name is Rebecca Winters, and for the last decade, I've been the invisible foundation holding my family's legacy together. As Chief Financial Officer of a Fortune 500 company, I've managed billions in corporate assets, but somehow couldn't secure even a mention in my parents' will. When they left everything, the historic family estate, the investment portfolio I'd quadrupled, even my childhood keepsakes, to my younger sister, I thought I'd lost everything. Then I discovered my grandmother's hidden trust documents and suddenly understood why my parents had been acting so strangely for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the beveled glass windows of my corner office, casting prismatic patterns across the quarterly reports spread before me. Outside, Chicago's financial district hummed with the energy of a Monday morning, but inside my sanctum of spreadsheets and strategy documents, I maintained the focused calm that had become my professional signature. My name is Rebecca Winters, and at 42, I'd carved out the kind of career that business magazines write feature articles about. As Chief Financial Officer of Meridian Global, I managed an international portfolio worth billions, had orchestrated 3 successful corporate mergers, and was regularly shortlisted for most influential women in finance recognitions. The world saw success, stability, and unshakable competence. What no one saw was the complex web of family obligations that had shaped every major decision of my adult life. My assistant's discreet knock interrupted my review of the Asian market's overnight performance. "Ms. Winters, your sister is online too. She says it's urgent." I suppressed a sigh. With Elise, everything was urgent. "Thank you, Miranda. I'll take it." Bracing myself, I picked up the receiver. "Elise? What's happening?" "Becca, finally!" My sister's voice carried its familiar note of breathless drama. At 35, Elise still approached life with the expectant enthusiasm of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by someone else. "I've been trying to reach you all weekend." "I was in Tokyo closing the Nakamura acquisition," I replied, resisting the urge to point out that she could have left a message like a normal person. "Is everything okay?" "Mom and Dad want us both at the lake house this weekend. Dad said it's important, something about estate planning and family legacy discussions. They're being super mysterious." I glanced at my calendar, already visualizing the cascade of rescheduling this would require. The executive committee meeting, the quarterly forecast review, the dinner with potential investors, all critical, none easily postponed. "This weekend is difficult, Elise. We're announcing our quarterly earnings on Monday and—" "Oh, come on, Becca," she interrupted, her tone shifting from excitement to practiced disappointment. "It's always work with you. Dad specifically said they need both of us there. Mom's making your favorite, that wild mushroom risotto you love." The mention of my mother's risotto, a dish she prepared only for special occasions or when she wanted something significant from me, triggered an immediate warning bell. Like Pavlov's dog, I had been conditioned to associate that particular meal with incoming requests for financial advice, investment capital, or other forms of practical support. "Fine," I conceded, already mentally drafting emails to rearrange my schedule. "I'll drive up Friday evening after my last meeting." "Perfect. Oh, and can you pick up that special olive oil Mom likes from that little import shop near your office? And maybe some of those chocolate truffles for Dad? Thanks, you're the best." The line went dead before I could respond, Elise having accomplished her mission without wasting time on pleasantries like "goodbye" or "thank you." I replaced the receiver, noting how familiar this interaction felt. Elise making requests, me accommodating them, all while maintaining the fiction that these were reasonable exchanges between equals. My relationship with Elise had always been complex. 12 years my parents' first child, I had grown up in a household defined by careful financial planning, educational expectations, and the clear understanding that privileges were earned through responsibility and achievement. By 14, I was managing my own bank account, saving for college, and helping with household budgeting. Elise's childhood unfolded in a markedly different environment. By the time she was born, our parents had achieved financial stability. Our father's architectural firm had secured several major commercial contracts, and our mother had established herself as a respected gallery owner showcasing emerging artists. The careful frugality that had characterized my early years evolved into comfortable abundance for Elise. The contrasting parenting approaches were evident in countless small ways. When I received my first job offer after college, my father's response was pragmatic. Make sure you contribute the maximum to your 401k immediately. When Elise decided to abandon her third college major to find herself through European travel, they funded her 6-month odyssey without question. I didn't resent these differences, at least I tried not to. I understood that parents evolve. Circumstances change, and each child naturally receives a different version of their parents. What I struggled with was the persistent expectation that I would continually step in to address the consequences of Elise's choices while receiving little acknowledgement for my own achievements or contributions. Over the past 15 years, I had provided financial support to my family in ways large and small. When my parents decided to renovate the lake house in northern Michigan, a 19th-century summer home that had been in our family for 4 generations, I contributed over $300,000 to preserve the historical details while modernizing the infrastructure. When Elise launched her boutique interior design business after deciding that art history was too theoretical, I provided the startup capital of $175,000 and connected her with several of my corporate clients who needed office redesigns. Most significantly, when my father's firm weathered a professional liability lawsuit 7 years ago, I liquidated a substantial portion of my investment portfolio to cover the legal fees and settlement, preventing the firm's collapse. The amount, just over $2 million, represented years of careful saving and strategically timed market moves. I provided it without hesitation, understanding both the practical necessity and the emotional importance of preserving my father's professional legacy. My parents expressed appropriate gratitude for these contributions, of course. There were thank you dinners, thoughtful gifts, and sincere expressions of appreciation. Yet underlying these gestures was a subtle implication that such support was simply what was expected from me, the responsible, successful daughter who had so much to spare. My financial achievements were simultaneously relied upon and subtly diminished, treated as the natural result of my practical personality rather than the product of strategic intelligence and disciplined effort. My office phone interrupted these reflections. It was Miranda again. Ms. Winters, your 10:30 is waiting in the conference room. Also, your mother called while you were speaking with your sister. She asked if you could bring those financial planning books you mentioned at Christmas, something about updating their estate documents. Thank you, Miranda. Please tell the Johannesburg team I'll be right there. Estate planning discussions, the lake house, my mother's special risotto, all the elements of what promised to be an uncomfortable weekend were falling into place. I gathered my materials for the meeting, mentally shifting gears from family complexities to international finance, a realm where the rules were at least explicit, the expectations clear, and the outcomes measurable. As I walked toward the conference room, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Looking forward to seeing you Friday. Don't forget, we need your financial expertise for some important decisions. Love you. There it was. The familiar pattern. My expertise was needed, my support expected, my weekend plans rearranged. And somehow, as always, I would make it work. I would drive the 4 hours to the lake house after a full day of meetings, arrive with the requested olive oil and chocolates, review whatever estate documents needed my attention, and provide whatever funds were required to address whatever new situation had arisen. Because that was my role. The reliable one, the successful one, the one who could always be counted on to solve problems and provide support without requiring much in return. What I didn't realize, as I strode confidently into that Monday morning meeting, was that the upcoming weekend would shatter this long-established dynamic forever. The estate planning discussion I anticipated would reveal far more than updated will provisions. It would expose the fundamental imbalance that had defined my family relationships for decades. And most surprisingly, it would be my grandmother, 8 years deceased, who would ultimately reshape our family's future through documents I didn't yet know existed. Friday afternoon arrived with the particular intensity that only end-of-week deadlines can generate. The quarterly earnings presentation had undergone 14 revisions, each more data-dense than the last. The Asian merger's tax implications had revealed unexpected complexities requiring hours of analysis, and the executive committee had raised last-minute concerns about our European expansion timeline, necessitating an impromptu strategy session that ran 90 minutes beyond its scheduled conclusion. By the time I finally left the Meridian Global Tower, the Chicago rush-hour traffic had reached its congested peak. I navigated through the crowded streets, my Mercedes sedan packed with the requested items, the imported olive oil from Tuscany that my mother favored, Belgian chocolate truffles for my father, 3 dense financial planning books, and an overnight bag containing the carefully selected casual but still presentable attire appropriate for a family weekend at our lake house. The drive north provided a gradual transition from urban intensity to rural tranquility. As concrete and glass gave way to forests and farmland, I felt the persistent tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Despite the complicated dynamics awaiting me, there was something undeniably restorative about the journey to Lake Charlevoix, where the historic Winters family property stood as a testament to 4 generations of family history. The Winters Lake House, as we simply called it, had been purchased by my great-grandfather in 1911, using proceeds from his successful lumber business. The sprawling Victorian with its distinctive turret and wraparound porch had served as our family's summer retreat for over a century. My earliest memories were formed there, learning to swim in the crystal-clear waters, reading books on the screened porch during summer thunderstorms, helping my grandmother tend her spectacular perennial gardens. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was my grandmother, Eleanor Winters, who had been the true steward of the property. A formidable woman born during the Great Depression, she combined practical financial wisdom with an unwavering commitment to family legacy. Property is more than land and buildings, she would tell me during our garden sessions. It's the physical manifestation of family values preserved through time. I had been her clear favorite among the grandchildren, though she was too diplomatic to state this explicitly. While Elise received grandmotherly affection and the occasional indulgent gift, I received mentorship. Eleanor taught me about compound interest when I was 11, helped me open my first investment account at 13, and gave me her personal copy of Security Analysis by Graham and Dodd for my 16th birthday, with her own annotations in the margins. When she passed away 8 years ago at the age of 92, I felt her loss with particular acuteness. She had been my ally, my advocate, and my guide in navigating the complex intersection of family and finances. Without her stabilizing presence, the subtle, preferential treatment of Elise had become more pronounced, though I'd made peace with this reality. Or so I thought. As I turned onto the private road leading to the lake house, the familiar view of water through pine trees calmed me further. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the lake's surface, and the historic house stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, windows already illuminated with warm light. Whatever uncomfortable discussions awaited me inside, at least the setting would be beautiful. I parked beside Elise's Range Rover, a birthday gift from our parents 3 years ago when she had briefly considered starting an adventure tourism business that never materialized, and gathered my various offerings before approaching the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal my mother, Catherine Winters, elegant as always in tailored linen pants and a silk blouse, her silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob. At 68, she maintained the poised demeanor cultivated during her years as a gallery owner, when appearance and social connections were as important as artistic knowledge. "Rebecca, darling, finally." She embraced me with the subtle scent of her signature perfume. "We were beginning to worry about the traffic. Come in, come in. Your father's just opened a beautiful Bordeaux that needs to breathe." I followed her into the familiar entryway with its gleaming hardwood floors and walls adorned with carefully selected artwork, some pieces collected during my parents' travels, others by artists my mother had discovered and promoted through her gallery. The house smelled of garlic and herbs, confirming that the promised risotto was indeed underway. In the spacious living room with its wall of windows overlooking the lake, my father stood at the bar cart, decanting wine with the meticulous attention he brought to all tasks. At 70, Richard Winters remained a commanding presence, tall, distinguished, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to having his architectural designs realized in steel and concrete. He looked up as I entered, his expression warming. "There's my financial wizard," he said, crossing the room to embrace me. "How was the Nakamura acquisition?" "Completed on schedule and under budget," I replied, handing him the box of Belgian sea truffles. "And the Anderson Tower design? Has the City Planning Commission approved the height variance?" This was our standard greeting ritual: professional accomplishments acknowledged, practical gifts exchanged, family pleasantries deferred in favor of substantive discussion. It was comfortable in its predictability, reflecting the mutual respect that characterized our relationship despite its occasional complications. "Approved unanimously," he confirmed with satisfaction. "Construction begins next quarter." "Rebecca!" Elise's voice carried from the kitchen doorway. My sister approached with characteristic energy, looking effortlessly stylish in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that exactly matched her hazel eyes. Her dark hair was arranged in artful waves that suggested both careful attention and casual elegance. "Thank God you're here. Maybe now they'll finally tell us what this mysterious meeting is all about." She embraced me with genuine affection, whatever our differences. Elise had never been deliberately unkind, merely accustomed to a world arranged for her convenience. I returned the hug, noting that despite our shared genetics, we had always been a study in contrasts: her artistic spontaneity versus my analytical planning, her social enthusiasm versus my reserved competence, her comfortable assumption of support versus my habitual provision of it. "Dinner first," our mother announced, returning from the kitchen with a bottle of sparkling water. Family business is always better discussed on a full stomach. The dining room, with its antique mahogany table and views of the moonlit lake, provided a setting both beautiful and intimidating for our family gathering. Crystal glasses caught the light from the overhead chandelier, another element I had paid to restore during the renovation, as we settled into our traditional places. The meal progressed with practiced civility. My mother's risotto was indeed exceptional. The wine perfectly complemented the food, and conversation flowed through safe channels of community news, mutual acquaintances, and Elise's latest design project for a local boutique hotel. It wasn't until dessert, lemon tart with fresh berries, that my father cleared his throat with the deliberate sound that had signaled important announcements throughout my childhood. "As you both know," he began, placing his dessert fork precisely beside his plate, "your mother and I have been reviewing our estate plans. At our age, it's important to have everything properly organized to avoid complications later." I nodded, having offered this exact advice repeatedly over the past several years. "That's prudent planning. I brought those reference books you asked for, and I'm happy to connect you with Meridian's estate planning team if you'd like specialized guidance. My mother exchanged a quick glance with my father, a small movement I might have missed had I not been trained by years of corporate negotiations to notice such subtle communications. "That's very thoughtful, Rebecca," she said. "But we've actually been working with our own attorney, Harrison Blake. You remember him from the Lakeside Arts Council. He's been extremely helpful in updating our will and trust documents." Harrison Blake. I did indeed remember him, a retirement-age attorney whose primary expertise was in real estate transactions, not the complex estate planning that my parents' situation warranted. I carefully controlled my expression, maintaining a neutral professional demeanor despite my immediate concerns about the adequacy of his guidance. "We wanted to discuss our decisions with both of you now," my father continued, "to ensure everything is clear and there are no surprises later." "Are you giving away my inheritance to some art foundation again, Mom?" Elise asked with a playful smile, referring to a previous occasion when our mother had briefly considered establishing a foundation to support emerging artists with a portion of her estate. My mother laughed lightly. "Nothing so dramatic, dear." "After careful consideration," my father said, his tone formal and measured, "we've decided that upon our passing, the lake house property and its contents will go to Elise." I maintained my composed expression, waiting for the rest of the estate. Distribution details. What portion would come to me? What specific assets had been designated for which daughter? The momentary silence extended uncomfortably as both my parents looked at me with an expectant tension that suggested they had completed rather than merely begun their explanation. "And?" I finally prompted, setting my dessert spoon beside my half-eaten tart. "And our investment portfolio, including the rental properties in Chicago and the vacation condominium in Scottsdale," my mother added, her voice taking on a slightly defensive quality I'd rarely heard before. I looked between them, processing the implications of these statements. "To be clear," I said slowly, using the same measured tone I employed when ensuring critical contract details were explicitly understood. "You're saying that all of your major assets, the lake house, investment portfolio, and properties, will go to Elise?" My father nodded once, firmly. "Yes. We believe this arrangement makes the most practical sense given your respective situations." The elegant dining room seemed to contract around us as the implications of my father's statement hung in the air. Outside, the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the sudden tension. I studied my parents' faces, searching for some indication that I had misunderstood or that additional clarification was forthcoming. Their expressions, my father's resolute certainty, my mother's uncomfortable but determined composure, confirmed that I had heard correctly. "I see," I finally said, my voice emerging with professional steadiness despite the hollowness expanding in my chest. "And may I ask the reasoning behind this decision?" My father straightened slightly, assuming the authoritative posture he typically reserved for difficult client meetings. "Rebecca, you've built extraordinary financial security for yourself. Your position at Meridian provides not only substantial compensation but also significant retirement benefits and stock options. You own your condominium outright. Your investment portfolio is diversified and robust, and your career trajectory continues to ascend." He paused, his expression softening marginally. "Elise's situation is more precarious. Her design business, while creatively fulfilling, doesn't generate consistent income. She hasn't established significant retirement savings. Her artistic temperament, while valuable in many ways, isn't conducive to the kind of financial planning that comes naturally to you." My mother reached across the table to touch my hand, a gesture meant to convey understanding, but which now felt patronizing. "Darling, you've always been our rock, our capable one. Elise simply needs more security than you do." I withdrew my hand gently but deliberately, needing physical space to process this information. The familiar dynamic crystallized with painful clarity. My success, built through discipline and strategic choices, was being used as justification for disinheritance, while Elise's financial instability, resulting from a series of impulsive decisions and abandoned commitments, was being rewarded with the entirety of our family's substantial assets. Across the table, Elise's expression revealed genuine surprise, followed quickly by poorly concealed satisfaction. "Wow," she said, her tone attempting humility, but failing to disguise her pleasure. "I didn't expect. Are you sure that's fair?" The performance of concern would have been more convincing had she not simultaneously reached for her wine glass with a hand that trembled slightly with excitement rather than distress. "Your father and I believe it's the most equitable approach, given your different circumstances," my mother replied firmly. "Rebecca has always been extraordinarily self-sufficient." Self-sufficient. The word echoed in my mind, its positive connotation suddenly revealed as a convenient justification for inequity. My self-sufficiency, the very quality that had led me to fund the lake house renovation, support Elise's business ventures, and rescue my father's firm from financial ruin, was now being cited as reason to exclude me from my family legacy. "Just to clarify," I said, employing the precise tone I used when identifying critical omissions in corporate financial reports, the lake house that I contributed over $300,000 to renovate, the investment portfolio that I helped restructure after the 2008 financial crisis, and the Chicago properties that I identified as potential acquisitions, all of these will bypass me entirely and go directly to Elise? My father shifted uncomfortably. "Your contributions have always been appreciated, Rebecca. But those were gifts freely given to the family, not investments with expected returns." "I see," I repeated, though what I was seeing with increasing clarity was not just this decision, but the pattern it represented. A lifetime of expected contribution without commensurate recognition or reciprocity. "Becca," Elise interjected, using my childhood nickname in an apparent attempt at solidarity, "I know this must seem unfair. If you want, I could sell some of the properties after. And share the proceeds with you." All the condescension in this offer, the assumption that I needed financial assistance rather than recognition of my place in our family, stung more sharply than the disinheritance itself. Before I could formulate a response, my father intervened. "That won't be necessary, Elise. Our decision is sound and reflects what's best for both of you in the long term." He turned to me with the expression he typically employed when delivering what he considered irrefutable logic. "Rebecca, you, more than anyone, understand the importance of appropriate asset allocation. We're simply ensuring resources flow where they're most needed." The corporate financial terminology, so incongruously applied to what should have been a deeply personal family decision, crystallized something within me. For decades, I had been viewed primarily as a resource, a reliable source of financial support and practical assistance, rather than as a daughter with emotional needs and legitimate claims to family connection and legacy. "When did you make this decision?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turbulence beneath. My mother glanced at my father before answering. "We've been considering it for several years, but finalized everything last month when Harrison completed the updated documents." Several years. The time frame encompassed countless family gatherings where this significant decision remained unmentioned, numerous occasions when I had provided additional financial support without knowing it would never be acknowledged or reciprocated, regular check-ins about their estate planning where they had solicited my expertise while concealing their intentions. "And when were you planning to inform me of this decision had I not directly asked about the distribution details?" The question emerged with calm precision despite the hurt building behind it. My father's momentary hesitation provided all the answer I needed. They had hoped to avoid explicit disclosure, to maintain my continued support and involvement without transparency about their plans for the future. "We're telling you now," my mother said, her tone suggesting I should be grateful for this belated honesty. We wanted you both to understand our thinking while we're still here to explain our reasoning. I nodded slowly, making a deliberate choice to maintain my composure. Decades of corporate leadership had taught me the strategic advantage of emotional containment, particularly when blindsided. I would not give them the satisfaction of witnessing the full impact of their revelation. "Thank you for your candor," I said, folding my napkin precisely and placing it beside my plate. "If you'll excuse me, I think I need some fresh air." Without waiting for a response, I rose from the table and walked with measured steps through the French doors onto the lakeside deck. The night air carried the scent of pine and water, familiar elements of countless summer evenings that now seemed to belong to a different life entirely. I moved to the railing, gripping the smooth wood my grandfather had originally installed and that I had paid to restore with historically accurate materials. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of continued conversation, my mother's concerned tone, my father's firm responses, Elise's higher-pitched questions. I ignored them, focusing instead on the moonlight creating a shimmering path across the dark water. The lake had witnessed 4 generations of Winter's family history: baptisms, weddings, anniversary celebrations, memorial gatherings after funerals. I had always assumed it would witness future generations as well, including my potential descendants. Now I understood that my branch of the family tree had been effectively pruned, my connection to this place deemed less valuable than my sister's, despite my significantly greater investment in its preservation. Footsteps approached from behind, and I steeled myself for whichever family member had been designated to manage my reaction. To my mild surprise, it was Elise who appeared at the railing beside me, her expression uncharacteristically serious in the moonlight. "I didn't know they were going to do this," she said quietly. "I swear, Becca." I studied her face, trying to determine whether this was genuine sentiment or performative concern. Elise had always been gifted at reading rooms and managing impressions, skills that served her well in design work, but made her emotional authenticity difficult to assess. "Would it have made a difference if you had known?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated, her honesty in that moment more revealing than any response she might have articulated. We both knew the answer. She might have expressed token protest, but would ultimately have accepted the advantageous arrangement without substantive objection. "I don't need their money," I continued, addressing the unspoken assumption. "My concern isn't financial security." "Then why are you upset?" she asked, genuine confusion crossing her features. The question revealed the fundamental disconnect in our perspectives. For Elise, inheritance represented practical resources: money, property, objects of value. For me, it represented recognition, inclusion, acknowledgement of contribution, and connection. The assets themselves were secondary to what they symbolized about my place within the family. "It's not about the assets," I explained, finding myself in the familiar position of translating emotional concepts into terms my family could comprehend. "It's about what this decision represents. I've spent my entire adult life supporting this family, financially, practically, emotionally. I've made career choices, investment decisions, and personal sacrifices with our collective well-being in mind. To discover that none of this has been truly valued or recognized is illuminating." Elise frowned, processing this perspective. "But they always talk about how proud they are of you, how successful and capable you are. Pride and appreciation aren't the same as recognition or reciprocity," I replied. "They're proud of what I provide, not who I am. There's a difference." A confused expression crossed her face, suggesting this distinction remained unclear to her. Before she could respond, the French doors opened again, and our father stepped onto the deck, his commanding presence immediately altering the dynamic between my sister and me. "Girls," he said, using the diminutive term he had employed throughout our childhood regardless of our accomplishments or maturity. "Your mother is serving coffee in the living room. Let's continue our discussion inside." Elise immediately responded to the implicit command, moving toward the doors with the habitual compliance that had characterized her relationship with our parents. I remained at the railing for a moment longer, considering my options before following them inside. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same strategic clarity I brought to corporate challenges, assessing the situation objectively, identifying available options, and implementing the course of action most aligned with my core values and long-term interests. The living room of the lake house had always projected a careful balance of historical preservation and comfortable luxury. Original wood beams spanned the cathedral ceiling, while contemporary furnishings in muted blues and grays echoed the lake's palette, visible through the wall of windows. The stone fireplace, where 4 generations of Winter's family members had gathered during winter retreats, now held a carefully arranged display of birch logs, more decorative than functional in the mild spring evening. My mother had arranged coffee service on the antique walnut table before the fireplace, the Limoges, porcelain set that had belonged to my grandmother, reserved for significant family occasions. The deliberate formality of this presentation further confirmed the importance they attached to this discussion, though the coffee itself seemed an inadequate social lubricant for the conversation ahead. I selected an armchair positioned slightly, apart from the main seating arrangement, a subtle physical manifestation of my emerging emotional distance. As my father poured coffee with meticulous attention to proper levels in each cup, I observed my family with the detached analytical perspective I typically reserved for challenging corporate negotiations. My mother, tense beneath her practiced, social poise, fidgeted with her wedding ring, a tell she displayed only when genuinely uncomfortable. My father maintained his authoritative bearing, but the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed concern about the direction of our discussion. Elise perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture oscillating between triumph and uncertainty as she recalibrated her response to match the room's emotional temperature. "Rebecca," my father began, using my full name to signal the seriousness of the moment. "Your mother and I understand this news comes as a surprise. We should have discussed our thinking with you earlier, and for that, I apologize." The acknowledgement, while welcome, addressed the timing of their disclosure rather than the substance of their decision. I accepted the coffee cup he offered but did not immediately respond, allowing the silence to create space for additional clarification or elaboration. "That said," he continued when I didn't fill the conversational gap, "we stand by our estate planning choices. They reflect our assessment of what will create the most stable future for both our daughters." I took a measured sip of coffee before setting the cup precisely on its saucer. "I appreciate your directness," I replied, matching his formal tone. "Since we're having an open discussion about family finances, I'd like to establish some context that seems relevant to this decision." Without waiting for permission or agreement, I continued. "Over the past 15 years, I've contributed approximately $1.8 million to this family. This includes $300,000 for the lake house renovation, $175,000 in startup capital for Elise's design business, and most significantly, $1.2 million to cover the lawsuit settlement and legal fees that threatened Dad's architectural firm." The explicit enumeration of these figures created immediate discomfort. My mother's eyes widened slightly. My father shifted in his seat, and Elise looked down at her untouched coffee. "I've also provided ongoing financial advice that has significantly improved your investment returns, identified tax optimization strategies that have saved approximately $430,000 over the past decade, and restructured your retirement accounts to maximize growth while minimizing risk exposure." My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, no one is questioning your generosity or expertise. We're deeply grateful for your support over the years. But family helps family. That's what we've always believed. Your contributions weren't loans or investments. They were expressions of family loyalty." "Family helps family," I repeated, the phrase suddenly revealing itself as a one-way street in our particular dynamic. Yet, when it comes to acknowledging my place in this family through your estate planning, I'm effectively erased. The lake house I helped preserve will go to Elise. The investment portfolio I helped optimize will go to Elise. The properties I helped identify and acquire will go to Elise. My mother leaned forward, her expression earnest. Darling, you're looking at this too literally. Of course you have a place in this family, the most secure place. You're our rock, our success story. Elise needs the financial security these assets will provide. You simply don't have the same needs. This isn't about financial need, I clarified, maintaining my composed demeanor despite the frustration building within me. This is about recognition and reciprocity. It's about acknowledging that I haven't just been a success story existing parallel to this family, but have been actively contributing to our collective security and legacy. Oh, for heaven's sake, my father interjected, his patience visibly thinning. We're not giving medals for family contributions, Rebecca. We're making practical decisions about asset distribution. Your financial independence is a blessing that allows us to provide additional security for your sister. Most people would see that as a mark of excellent parenting, raising a daughter so capable she needs nothing from them. The statement crystallized decades of family dynamics into one revealing sentence. My self-sufficiency, cultivated through discipline and strategic decision-making, had not earned me recognition or reciprocity, but had instead been used to justify my exclusion. I had become a family asset rather than a family member, valued for what I provided rather than who I was. I understand your perspective now, I said, the calm in my voice belying the clarity crystallizing within me. And since we're discussing practical asset distribution rather than family connection or legacy, I have some practical matters to address as well. I reached for my handbag, removing my smartphone and opening the banking application with deliberate movements. For the past 7 years, I've been making monthly contributions to the Lake House Maintenance Fund, $30,200 per month to cover property taxes, insurance, caretaker salary, and regular upkeep. I've also been subsidizing Dad's malpractice insurance at $4,500 per quarter since the lawsuit settlement. My fingers moved efficiently across the screen as I navigated to the recurring payments section. Given your estate planning decisions, these financial arrangements no longer align with my priorities. I'll be canceling these recurring transfers effective immediately. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably as the practical implications of my statement registered. My father's expression hardened, while my mother's showed the first signs of genuine alarm. You can't do that, my father stated flatly. The property taxes are due next month, and my insurance renewal is pending. I looked up from my phone, meeting his gaze directly. I can and I am. Just as you have every right to determine the distribution of your assets, I have every right to determine the allocation of mine. This is emotional blackmail, he accused, color rising in his face. No, I corrected calmly. This is practical asset distribution. I'm making decisions based on return on investment and strategic resource allocation, concepts you both claim to value. I'm simply ensuring my resources flow where they're most appropriately recognized. My mother's composure faltered completely. Rebecca, please. We never meant to hurt you. We just thought... You thought I would continue providing financial support indefinitely while accepting complete exclusion from the family legacy. I completed her sentence. That was a miscalculation. Elise, who had remained uncharacteristically silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. This is about me, isn't it? You're punishing all of us because you're jealous that I'm getting the inheritance. The accusation was so fundamentally misaligned with reality that it momentarily stunned me. After all the explicit clarification about recognition versus financial need, she had distilled the complex situation down to simplistic sibling rivalry. Before I could formulate a response that might bridge this profound comprehension gap, my father intervened. "That's enough, Elise," he said sharply. "This isn't helpful." He turned back to me, his expression modulating from anger to strategic conciliation. "Rebecca, let's discuss this rationally. Perhaps we've been too absolute in our estate planning. We could revise the arrangements to include specific provisions for you, perhaps the Chicago properties, or a percentage of the investment portfolio." The rapid pivot to negotiation revealed that my financial leverage had finally penetrated their perspective. Suddenly, when my ongoing contributions were threatened, partial inclusion became possible. The transactional nature of this reversal only confirmed the dynamics I was now seeing with painful clarity. "I'm not negotiating for inclusion in my own family," I replied with quiet dignity. "I'm simply aligning my financial choices with the reality you've presented. If you view me primarily as a resource rather than a daughter deserving of equal recognition, I'll adjust my behavior accordingly." I stood, gathering my handbag with deliberate calm. "I'll be returning to Chicago tonight rather than staying over as planned. I have an early meeting tomorrow that requires preparation." This was untrue. My Saturday was intentionally left, unscheduled, but provided a professional pretext for my departure that preserved my dignity while preventing further unproductive confrontation. "You can't just leave in the middle of this discussion," my father protested, the authority in his voice undermined by the uncertainty now evident in his expression. "The discussion appears complete," I observed. "You've clarified your estate, planning decisions and the reasoning behind them. I've clarified my response to those decisions. Further conversation tonight would likely generate heat rather than light." My mother rose quickly, distress evident in her movements. "Rebecca, please, stay the night at least. It's late and the drive is long. We can talk more in the morning when everyone's had some rest." I recognized the familiar pattern. My mother's attempt to postpone difficult conversations in hopes that compliance with social expectations would eventually supersede substantive resolution. This pattern had effectively maintained our family's surface harmony while allowing fundamental inequities to persist unchallenged. "I prefer to leave now," I stated simply. "I'll gather my overnight bag from the guest room." As I moved toward the staircase, Elise followed me into the hallway, her expression conflicted. "Becca, wait. You're overreacting. It's just money and stuff, not some statement about your place in the family." I paused, studying my sister's face. The genuine confusion there confirmed that despite our shared genetics and upbringing, we operated from fundamentally different perspectives on family, value, and recognition. "It has never been about the money or the property," I explained one final time. "It's about what those things represent. When you understand that distinction, we can have a meaningful conversation." I continued up the stairs, leaving her standing in the hallway with an expression that suggested the beginning of comprehension, though whether that seed would grow remained uncertain. The drive back to Chicago unfolded through darkened landscapes, the highway cutting a ribbon of asphalt through forests and farmland now invisible in the night. My headlights illuminated only the immediate path forward, an apt metaphor for my current perspective, focused solely on the next steps rather than the broader emotional terrain. The lake house diminished in my rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, just as my idealized vision of family connection had receded into a more realistic understanding of my place within that structure. I drove with methodical precision, my hands positioned exactly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my speed a consistent 5 miles above the posted limit, maintaining control in the ways available to me after an evening where so much had proven beyond my influence. The familiar route required minimal conscious attention, allowing my analytical mind to process the evening's revelations and their implications for my future decisions. My phone, resting in the passenger seat, illuminated periodically with incoming calls and messages. My mother had tried 3 times in the first 30 minutes after my departure. My father, typically more restrained, had called once and followed with a text message stating simply, "This conversation isn't finished. Call when you're ready to discuss this rationally." Elise had sent a series of increasingly emotional texts ranging from defensive accusations to tearful apologies, the digital equivalent of her typical emotional volatility. I let them all go unanswered, needing the solitude to process my thoughts, without the distorting influence of their perspectives. The conversation at the lake house had stripped away comforting illusions about my family relationships, illusions I had unconsciously maintained despite mounting evidence to the contrary. I had believed that my contributions were recognized even if not explicitly acknowledged, that my place in the family legacy was secure even if not frequently discussed, that my value extended beyond my practical utility even if rarely expressed. In emotional terms, the estate planning decisions had revealed the fundamental inaccuracy of these assumptions. I had been measuring family connection through a metric my parents and sister neither recognized nor valued. To them, my security and success justified my exclusion rather than earning my inclusion, my independence rather than representing an achievement to be celebrated had become a convenient rationale for taking me for granted. Chicago's skyline appeared on the horizon around midnight, the familiar constellation of lights offering a strange comfort. Unlike the lake house with its complicated emotional resonance, my downtown condominium represented a space I had created entirely on my own terms, a sanctuary designed around my preferences, maintained with my resources, and free from the complex dynamics of family expectations. The underground parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. I parked in my designated space, gathered my overnight bag and handbag, and took the private elevator to the 38th floor. The silent ascent provided a moment of transition between the emotional turbulence of the evening and the composed solitude of my home space. My condominium, occupying a corner position with views of both the lake and the city, welcomed me with the subtle scent of the fresh flowers my housekeeper refreshed twice weekly. The space reflected my aesthetic preferences: clean architectural lines softened by carefully selected textiles, a neutral palette punctuated by strategic color elements, museum-quality artwork that satisfied both my visual sensibilities and investment criteria. Everything here had been chosen with intentional consideration rather than inherited or imposed. I moved through my evening routine with automatic efficiency, changing into comfortable loungewear, preparing a cup of herbal tea, reviewing priority emails on my tablet. These familiar actions provided a soothing rhythm after the evening's disruption, gradually restoring my equilibrium through their predictable sequence. Settling into the window seat overlooking the lake, a different view of the same body of water that surrounded the family property, I permitted myself to fully acknowledge the emotions I had carefully contained throughout the evening. Disappointment at the explicit confirmation of my second-tier status within the family. Anger at the casual dismissal of my substantial contributions. Grief for the connection I had believed existed but now understood was largely imagined. Most importantly, I recognized the liberating clarity that accompanied these more painful emotions. For years, I had maintained an unbalanced investment in family relationships, consistently providing more than I received while constructing elaborate justifications for this inequity. The estate planning revelation had removed any ambiguity about this imbalance, creating an opportunity for realignment based on accurate perception rather than wishful thinking. As midnight gave way to early morning, I felt a peculiar restlessness that seemed at odds with my physical exhaustion. Something about being in this space, surrounded by evidence of my independent choices and achievements, triggered a memory connection that initially remained just beyond conscious reach. I moved from the window seat to my home office, drawn there by an intuition I couldn't immediately articulate. The office, like every space in my home, reflected precise organization and intentional design. One wall featured built-in shelving containing professional reference materials, industry reports, and financial journals. Another held my awards and credentials, MBA diploma, professional certifications, recognition from industry organizations. The custom-designed desk offered a commanding view of the city while providing efficient access to necessary technologies and resources. A small safe was incorporated into the cabinetry behind my desk, a discreet yet secure location for important documents and valuables. I entered the digital code and opened the reinforced door, initially uncertain what specific item had prompted this midnight investigation. The contents were methodically organized: passport and essential identification documents, certain financial instruments requiring physical documentation, family heirlooms of particular value or significance. My hand moved almost involuntarily to a leather portfolio positioned at the back of the safe, a document case I hadn't reviewed in nearly 8 years. The embossed monogram on its cover read EGW, Eleanor Grace Winters, my grandmother. I extracted it carefully, remembering the day she had given it to me just 3 weeks before her death. "This contains information you may need someday," she had told me, her voice weakened by advancing illness, but her mind still razor-sharp. "Keep it safe and private until circumstances require its review." I had honored her request, placing the portfolio in my safe without examining its contents, trusting her judgment about both the importance of the documents and the timing of their revelation. In the emotional aftermath of her death and the subsequent years of career advancement and family support, I had thought of the portfolio only occasionally, always concluding that the appropriate circumstances for its review had not yet materialized. Now, sitting at my desk in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a certainty that the time had arrived. The portfolio represented my grandmother's final communication, a message preserved until it could be properly understood and utilized. With careful movements that honored both the physical document and the intention behind it, I untied the leather cord that secured the portfolio and opened its cover. Inside lay several document sets, each in its own labeled folder, organized with my grandmother's characteristic precision. The top folder, marked "Read First" in her distinctive handwriting, contained a letter addressed to me, the heavy cream stationery bearing the date exactly 1 month before her death. "My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this letter, I must assume that circumstances have forced a difficult recognition regarding your position within our family structure. Knowing both you and the patterns established over generations within the Winters family, I anticipate this recognition involves the painful awareness that your contributions are simultaneously relied upon and undervalued, a paradox I understand intimately from my own experience. The documents contained in this portfolio represent information I have carefully compiled throughout my stewardship of our family's financial and property interests. They include legal instruments, financial records, and historical documentation that may prove relevant to protecting your interests when they inevitably come into conflict with prevailing family dynamics. Of particular significance is the trust document in the blue folder, which I established in 1986 and have maintained with careful amendments over subsequent decades. While Richard and Catherine believe they hold complete authority over the lake, house property, and certain investment assets, the legal reality is considerably more complex. The trust structure places significant limitations on their discretionary control, limitations they have either forgotten or chosen to ignore in their estate planning. I have observed your development with profound pride, recognizing in you the qualities of integrity, intelligence, and strategic thinking that truly honor our family's legacy. Your father and sister, while possessing their own valuable attributes, lack the fundamental understanding of stewardship that you demonstrate consistently through both professional achievement and personal choices. You may wonder why I did not address these matters directly during my lifetime. Experience taught me that premature confrontation often entrenches problematic patterns rather than resolving them. Some recognitions must occur organically to be truly integrated rather than temporarily accommodated. I trusted you would recognize when the appropriate moment arrived to utilize this information, a moment when clarity about family dynamics coincided with the emotional strength to address long-established imbalances. Remember always that legacy transcends simple inheritance. It encompasses values, wisdom, and the courage to ensure these continue despite resistance. You are the true steward of the Winters legacy, regardless of current misconceptions about asset distribution. With enduring confidence in your judgment, Grandmother Eleanor, I read the letter 3 times, each review revealing additional layers of meaning and foresight. My grandmother had anticipated this exact situation, not through mystical prediction, but through clear-eyed understanding of established family patterns. She had recognized dynamics I was only now perceiving, and had prepared resources to address them when the appropriate moment arrived. With renewed focus, I turned my attention to the blue folder she had specifically highlighted. Inside was a comprehensive trust document establishing the Eleanor Grace Winters Family Preservation Trust, dated 1986, with amendments extending through 2014, just months before her death. The document ran to nearly 60 pages of dense legal language, but the executive summary attached to the front outlined its essential provisions with characteristic clarity. The trust held legal ownership of the Lake House property and approximately 60% of the family's investment portfolio, assets my parents had presented as being entirely under their control. More significantly, the trust contained specific provisions regarding succession and inheritance that directly contradicted the estate plan my parents had described. According to the binding trust provisions, these assets were explicitly designated to pass to the Winters descendant, demonstrating the greatest commitment to responsible financial stewardship and preservation of family legacy. Language that established merit rather than need as the determining factor for inheritance. A separate provision specifically stated that financial success achieved through discipline and strategic decision-making should be considered evidence of such stewardship rather than grounds for exclusion from inheritance. The document further revealed that my grandmother had appointed me as successor trustee upon her death, granting me significant authority regarding these assets that I had never been informed about or exercised. The legal right to manage and make decisions about the Lake House property and the majority of the investment portfolio had rested with me for the past 8 years, though I had remained unaware of this authority while my parents continued acting as if they held complete control. As the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, illuminating both the city and the lake beyond my windows, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of both the past and the future. What had seemed like a painful exclusion now revealed itself as an opportunity to honor my grandmother's legacy by asserting the values and provisions she had carefully established. The revelation wasn't simply about regaining assets or authority. It represented something far more significant, the validation that my approach to family legacy had been recognized and valued by the family member whose judgment I respected most. While my parents had dismissed my contributions as expected obligations, my grandmother had seen them as evidence of the qualities she most wanted preserved in the family's future. I closed the portfolio, returned it to the safe, and moved to the window to watch the sunrise fully emerge over Lake Michigan. The same waters that surrounded the family lake house flowed past my urban sanctuary, a physical connection between past and future that suddenly seemed profoundly meaningful. The path forward would require careful navigation, legal consultations, difficult conversations, potential conflict with long-established family expectations. But for the first time since leaving the lake house hours earlier, I felt a certainty about both my position and my direction. My grandmother had provided not just legal leverage but philosophical validation, confirming that my understanding of legacy, contribution, and recognition aligned with hers despite my parents' contradictory perspective. As the new day fully emerged, I made 2 decisions. First, I would take the day to thoroughly review all documents in the portfolio, ensuring complete understanding before taking any action. Second, I would approach this situation not from a position of wounded exclusion, but from one of rightful authority and responsibility, not fighting for inclusion in a flawed system, but asserting the values and provisions already established by my grandmother's foresight. The competitive financial strategist in me recognized the power shift these documents represented. The wounded daughter in me felt profound validation from my grandmother's recognition. But most importantly, the true steward of the Winters legacy within me recognized the responsibility that came with this revelation, to ensure that merit, contribution, and genuine commitment to family values would determine our collective future rather than entitlement, dependency, or manipulation. Saturday morning arrived with unusual clarity after my pre-dawn revelations. Despite minimal sleep, I felt energized by a sense of purpose that had been absent during yesterday's reactive emotional state. The documents in my grandmother's portfolio had transformed my understanding from one of personal rejection to one of strategic responsibility. This wasn't merely about family dynamics. It was about honoring a carefully constructed legacy that had been entrusted specifically to my stewardship. After a brief but invigorating run along the lakefront path, physical activity had always helped organize my thoughts. I returned to my condominium and prepared for a day of methodical analysis. I brewed a pot of the single-origin Ethiopian coffee I reserved for weekend mornings, assembled a light breakfast of Greek yogurt with fresh berries, and arranged my workspace with the precision that characterized both my professional and personal approaches to important tasks. The dining table, with its expansive surface of polished marble, provided the ideal setting for document review. I spread the contents of my grandmother's portfolio in categorical groupings: legal instruments, financial records, correspondence, and historical documentation. From this aerial perspective, the comprehensive nature of Eleanor's planning became evident. This wasn't a hastily assembled collection of documents, but a carefully curated archive reflecting decades of strategic foresight. The centerpiece remained the Eleanor Grace Winters Family Preservation Trust, whose significance I had only begun to comprehend during my initial review. With fresh coffee beside me and legal reference materials accessible on my tablet, I undertook a thorough analysis of this document, making detailed notes on key provisions and their implications. The trust's structure was elegant in its sophistication. Rather than establishing rigid distribution requirements based on traditional family hierarchies, Eleanor had created a merit-based system that prioritized demonstrated commitment to family legacy over generational position or emotional appeal. The document explicitly defined family legacy to encompass not just financial assets but philosophical values, specifically identifying financial responsibility, ethical decision-making, and genuine contribution to family welfare as the criteria for stewardship. Most significantly, the trust granted the appointed trustee, a position I had unknowingly held for 8 years, substantial discretionary authority regarding both asset management and eventual distribution. This authority included the power to override contradictory estate planning documents created by beneficiaries, specifically in cases where such documents undermined the trust's core preservation objectives. In practical terms, this meant that my parents' decisions to leave all assets to a lease could be legally superseded based on my assessment of which family member best exemplified the stewardship qualities defined in the trust. The document contained specific language addressing exactly this scenario. Should any subsequent estate planning by trust beneficiaries attempt to concentrate assets based on perceived need rather than demonstrated stewardship, the trustee maintains authority to realign distribution according to the merit principles established herein. My grandmother had anticipated not just the general situation, but the specific justification my parents would employ. Additional documentation revealed that Eleanor had funded the trust with the original deed to the lake house property, transferred investment assets valued at approximately $3.7 million in 1986, now worth substantially more, and established a separate maintenance fund specifically for property preservation. My parents had been granted lifetime usage rights to these assets, but had never held the comprehensive ownership they had presented to me in a lease. As morning transitioned to afternoon, I expanded my review to include the correspondence section of the portfolio. This collection contained letters between Eleanor and various family members, legal advisors, and financial managers over a period spanning more than 40 years. The earliest letters, dating to the late 1970s, documented her growing concern about my father's approach to family resources, his tendency to prioritize appearances over sustainability, immediate gratification over long-term security. A letter from 1985, addressed to her attorney, articulated the rationale for establishing the trust the following year. Having observed Richard's management of both personal and professional resources, I have concluded that unrestricted inheritance would likely result in dissipation rather than preservation of family assets. The trust structure I envision would maintain his comfort while protecting the legacy for future generations who may demonstrate greater stewardship capacity. The correspondence revealed that Eleanor had maintained detailed observations of all family members, assessing our respective approaches to resources, responsibility, and relationship. Her notes about me, beginning when I was just a child showing interest in her gardening ledger, documented the development of qualities she clearly valued: my natural inclination toward planning, my willingness to delay gratification for future benefit, my consistent follow-through on commitments. Similar observations about Elise noted her creative talents and emotional intelligence, but expressed concern about her tendency to view resources as tools for immediate gratification rather than vehicles for sustained value creation. One particularly insightful entry from 2010 observed, Elise displays remarkable ability to inspire affection and generate enthusiasm for her endeavors. However, her pattern of abandoning projects when they require sustained effort suggests limitations. Regarding long-term stewardship responsibilities, the historical documentation section provided context for Eleanor's perspective on family legacy. Records dating back to my great-grandfather's acquisition of the Lake House property in 1911 revealed that each generation had faced its own challenges regarding preservation versus exploitation of family resources. Eleanor's own parents had weathered significant financial hardship during the Great Depression, while maintaining the lake property through strategic sacrifices and creative management, experiences that clearly shaped her philosophy about stewardship and legacy. By late afternoon, I had developed a comprehensive understanding of both the legal instruments at my disposal and the philosophical framework that had guided their creation. What remained was determining how to proceed in a manner that honored both the letter and spirit of my grandmother's intentions. This would require balancing assertiveness with wisdom, authority with compassion, qualities Eleanor herself had exemplified throughout her stewardship. I prepared a fresh pot of tea and moved to the living room, exchanging analytical review for strategic planning. The approaching sunset cast a golden glow across the lake, creating a moment of visual connection with the family property that now held new significance in my understanding. With notebook in hand, I outlined potential approaches for addressing the situation. Option 1 involved immediate legal assertion of my trustee authority, contacting my parents' attorney to inform him of the trust's precedence over their estate, planning and formally notifying my parents of the limitations on their decision-making authority. This approach would establish clear boundaries and correct misconceptions swiftly, but risked creating defensive reactions that might undermine long-term family relationships. Option 2 presented a more measured alternative, scheduling a family meeting with proper preparation, including having the trust documentation professionally presented by a neutral legal advisor. This would provide space for processing the information while establishing the legitimacy of the trust provisions through third-party verification. Option 3 offered a hybrid approach, meeting privately with my parents first to present the information directly, followed by a full family discussion that included Elise once my parents had processed the initial revelation. This would preserve their dignity while still ensuring complete transparency about the actual legal status of family assets. As I considered these alternatives, I recognized that my decision would reflect not just strategic effectiveness, but values implementation. Which approach would best honor both the authority I had been granted and the responsibility that accompanied it? Which would demonstrate the very qualities of stewardship the trust was designed to reward? My mother's name appeared on my phone's screen, interrupting these reflections with her fourth call since my departure from the lake house. After a moment's consideration, I decided to answer, curious whether the night's reflection had generated any evolution in her perspective. "Rebecca," she began, her voice carrying the forced brightness that typically masked anxiety. "I'm so glad you answered. Your father and I have been worried about you driving so late. Did you arrive home safely?" "Yes, several hours ago," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm fine." "Good, good." Her relief seemed genuine before quickly transitioning to the real purpose of her call. "Listen, darling, about last night. I think we all got a bit emotional. Your father and I have been talking, and we realize we should have approached the estate planning discussion differently." "In what way?" I inquired, neither accepting nor rejecting this partial acknowledgement. "Well, we presented it too absolutely. There's certainly room for adjustments that would include specific provisions for you. Perhaps the Chicago property, as your father suggested, or a portion of the investment portfolio." The negotiation attempt confirmed that nothing fundamental had changed in their understanding. They still viewed the situation as one of discretionary generosity on their part, rather than recognition of equal family standing. More significantly, they remained unaware that the assets they were offering to share were largely not theirs to distribute in the first place. "I appreciate the call, Mom," I said, maintaining my professional composure. "I've had some time to reflect as well, and I believe we need a more comprehensive family discussion about legacy and stewardship." "Oh?" The caution in her voice suggested awareness that my calm response didn't indicate simple acceptance of their adjusted offer. "Yes, there are some important factors that weren't addressed in our conversation last night. I'd like to schedule a meeting next weekend where we can discuss these elements with appropriate documentation and perspective." "Documentation?" The caution shifted toward concern. "What kind of documentation?" "Information relevant to the actual legal status of the family assets discussed in your estate planning," I replied, intentionally providing enough information to signal significance, without revealing specifics that might trigger premature reaction. A telling silence followed before she responded. "I'm not sure what you mean, but of course we can meet again. Should we come to Chicago, or would you prefer to return to the lake house?" "The lake house would be more appropriate given the subject matter," I answered. "I'll make arrangements to come up Friday evening. Please make sure both Dad and Elise will be present for a Saturday morning discussion." "Of course." Her tone had shifted from forced brightness to genuine uncertainty. "Rebecca, is everything all right? You sound different." "Everything is becoming clearer," I replied truthfully. "We'll talk more next weekend. Give my best to Dad." After ending the call, I returned to my strategic planning with renewed clarity. The conversation had confirmed my assessment of their current perspective while providing a scheduled opportunity for comprehensive disclosure. Option 3, the private conversation followed by family discussion, now seemed most appropriate given my mother's evident concern and uncertainty. As darkness fell across the lake, I finalized my action plan for the week ahead. Monday would involve consulting with specialized trust and estate attorneys to verify my understanding of the documentation and prepare appropriate presentations of the information. Tuesday through Thursday would focus on organizing the historical and financial records to clearly demonstrate the patterns of stewardship and contribution my grandmother had documented. Friday would require emotional preparation for what promised to be a consequential family meeting. Throughout this planning process, I maintained awareness that my objective extended beyond simply asserting legal authority or correcting familial misconceptions. The true goal aligned perfectly with my grandmother's stated purpose, ensuring that the Winters family legacy, both material assets and core values, remained protected through proper stewardship for generations to come. The revelation of the trust documents had transformed my understanding from one of personal rejection to one of appointed responsibility. I had not been excluded from the family legacy. I had been specifically selected to protect it, even against well-intentioned mismanagement by other family members. This perspective shift replaced hurt with purpose, rejection with recognition, and reaction with strategic response. As I closed my notebook and prepared for an early night's rest, I felt profound gratitude for my grandmother's foresight. She had not only provided the legal instruments necessary to address the current situation, but had demonstrated through her own example the balance of assertiveness and wisdom required for effective stewardship. The path ahead would undoubtedly include difficult conversations and potential conflict, but the foundation for constructive resolution had been carefully established through Eleanor's decades of strategic planning and values clarification. Tomorrow would bring further preparation, but tonight had already delivered the most essential element for moving forward: the recognition that I was not fighting for inclusion in a family legacy, but fulfilling my appointed role as its designated protector. Monday morning arrived with Chicago's characteristic bustle, the financial district awakening to another week of transactions, negotiations, and strategic maneuvers. I entered the Meridian Global Tower at precisely 7:15 a.m., earlier than my usual arrival time, determined to address my professional responsibilities efficiently to create space for my personal priorities. The quarterly earnings announcement proceeded flawlessly, with our CFO team delivering results that exceeded market expectations across all key metrics. I maintained perfect professional focus throughout the presentations and subsequent analyst calls, compartmentalizing the weekend's revelations and the week's personal objectives. This capacity for maintaining performance regardless of personal circumstances had served me well throughout my career, a quality my grandmother had noted in her observations as evidence of resilience under pressure. By mid-afternoon, I had completed the day's essential professional tasks and turned my attention to identifying appropriate legal counsel for the trust matter. This required someone with specialized expertise in trust administration and intergenerational wealth transfer, preferably unconnected to either my parents' advisors or Meridian's standard counsel, to avoid any appearance of conflict. After thorough research and discreet inquiries through professional networks, I scheduled a 4:30 p.m. consultation with Victoria Harrington of Harrington, Chen & Associates, a boutique firm specializing in complex trust litigation with a particular focus on family wealth governance. Her credentials included both legal expertise and training in family systems therapy, suggesting the balanced approach the situation required. The firm occupied the 23rd floor of a sleek glass tower in Chicago's near North Side, its reception area projecting understated elegance with its muted color palette and museum-quality contemporary art. The space communicated precisely the blend of sophistication and discretion appropriate for handling sensitive family financial matters. Victoria Harrington herself reflected this same balance, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair styled in a precise bob, attired in a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation. Her office featured floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Lake Michigan, though the arrangement of her desk prioritized client interaction rather than scenic distraction. "Ms. Winters," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for trusting us with this consultation. I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided, but I'd appreciate hearing your understanding of the situation directly." I presented the circumstances with professional concision, beginning with my parents' estate planning announcement and proceeding through my discovery of the trust documentation. Throughout this summary, I maintained factual accuracy while acknowledging the emotional context, recognizing that both elements were relevant to developing an effective approach. "May I review the trust documents?" Victoria asked after absorbing my initial overview. I extracted the blue folder from my briefcase and placed it on her desk, watching as she examined the contents with the methodical attention of an experienced specialist. Her occasional nods and thoughtful hums suggested recognition of both standard provisions and more distinctive elements of my grandmother's approach. After 15 minutes of careful review, including particular attention to the amendments and codicils added over the decades, she looked up with an expression of professional admiration. "This is an exceptionally well-crafted instrument," she observed. "Your grandmother worked with skilled counsel, obviously, but the underlying philosophical framework extends beyond standard legal provisions. The merit-based approach to legacy preservation is relatively uncommon but perfectly valid when properly established, as it certainly has been here." "And my legal standing as trustee?" I inquired, seeking confirmation of my interpretation. "Unequivocal," Victoria confirmed without hesitation. "You were properly appointed as successor trustee upon your grandmother's death. The documentation includes the necessary certificates and filings, though it appears you were never formally notified of this appointment or provided with the administrative guidance typically accompanying such a transition." "That's correct. Until discovering this portfolio Friday night, I had no knowledge of either the trust's specific provisions or my role as trustee." Victoria's expression reflected both professional concern and strategic consideration. "This creates an unusual situation. For 8 years, your parents have been operating as if they held complete authority over assets actually governed by trust provisions, with you as the legally designated administrator. Their recent estate planning decisions directly contradict the trust's explicit directions regarding merit-based succession. What would you recommend as the most appropriate path forward?" I asked, valuing her expertise while maintaining my own decision-making authority. Victoria considered this question thoughtfully before responding. "From a strictly legal perspective, you could immediately assert your trustee authority through formal notification to all relevant parties. The documentation would support such action without question." She paused, tapping one finger lightly against the trust document. "However, given the family dynamics you've described and the lengthy period during which your trustee role remained unexercised, a more measured approach might better serve both legal and relational objectives." This assessment aligned with my own preliminary thinking. "What specific steps would constitute such a measured approach?" "I would recommend 3 phases," Victoria replied, shifting into strategic planning mode. "First, comprehensive documentation preparation, organizing all relevant trust materials, financial records, and historical documentation into a clear presentation that establishes both legal authority and philosophical purpose. Second, private discussion with your parents prior to the full family meeting, allowing them to process the information without the additional complexity of your sisters' presence. Third, facilitated family discussion with all parties, potentially with both legal counsel and family systems, support present to navigate both technical and emotional elements. Her recommendation closely mirrored my own strategic assessment, providing professional validation of my planned approach. That aligns with my thinking, I acknowledged. I've scheduled a family meeting for this coming Saturday, with plans to arrive Friday evening for preliminary discussion with my parents. An appropriate timeline, Victoria confirmed. This gives us 4 days to prepare comprehensive materials. I would be available to accompany you in an advisory capacity for Saturday's discussion, should you desire professional representation during the disclosure process. We spent the EEI next hour outlining specific preparation requirements, document organization, presentation materials, anticipatory responses to likely objections or concerns. Victoria's experience with similar family wealth transitions proved invaluable, providing insight into typical reaction patterns and effective management approaches. One final consideration, she noted as our consultation concluded. While the legal authorities are clearly established in these documents, the relationship aspects will require equal attention. Your grandmother appears to have understood this. Balance, Her meticulous legal planning was matched by thoughtful consideration of family dynamics and values transmission. Honoring her legacy means maintaining this same holistic perspective. This observation resonated deeply with my understanding of my grandmother's approach to family stewardship. Eleanor had never viewed legal instruments as mere technical documents, but as frameworks for expressing and protecting core values across generations. My implementation of her carefully constructed plan would require the same integration of technical authority and philosophical purpose. I appreciate that perspective, I replied. The objective isn't simply asserting control, but ensuring appropriate stewardship according to the principles my grandmother established. Victoria nodded with evident approval. Precisely. Many clients in similar situations focus exclusively on the authority component while neglecting the responsibility dimension. Your balanced understanding suggests you're well-positioned to implement your grandmother's intentions effectively. We concluded with arrangements for document preparation, agreement on communication protocols, and scheduling for Saturday's family meeting. As I departed, Victoria offered a final observation. In my experience, these situations ultimately reveal character more than they change it. The trust your grandmother placed in you appears well-founded based on your approach to this challenging circumstance. The validation from this experienced professional provided additional confirmation that my strategic path aligned with both legal requirements and ethical considerations. Driving back to my condominium through early evening traffic, I felt increasing confidence in both my authority and my approach to exercising it. Tuesday and Wednesday unfolded according to my established plan, professional responsibilities addressed with characteristic efficiency during business hours, personal preparation for the family meeting conducted during evenings. Victoria's firm provided exceptional support, creating clear visual presentations of the trust structure, organizing chronological documentation of key decisions and contributions, and developing anticipatory responses to potential objections or concerns. Thursday brought an unexpected development in the form of multiple calls from my father throughout the day. Having maintained limited communication since the previous weekend's confrontation, his sudden persistence suggested either new developments or growing anxiety about our scheduled meeting. After completing an important client presentation late, Thursday afternoon, I returned his most recent call from the privacy of my office. "Rebecca," he answered immediately, his tone carrying a combination of authority and uncharacteristic uncertainty. "We need to discuss this meeting you've arranged. Your mother mentioned documentation and legal status. What exactly are you planning to present on Saturday?" The question presented a strategic decision point: how much to reveal in advance versus maintaining informational advantage for the face-to-face discussion. After brief consideration, I opted for limited transparency that would prepare him for serious discussion without triggering premature defensive reactions. "I've discovered information about the actual legal status of certain family assets," I replied, maintaining professional composure. "Information that significantly impacts the estate planning decisions you shared last weekend. I believe it's important to review this documentation together as a family, with appropriate opportunity for questions and discussion." "What information?" he pressed, tension evident in his voice. "Rebecca, if you've been investigating our financial affairs or consulting with attorneys about our estate planning—" "Dad," I interrupted with calm authority, "this isn't about investigation or interference. It's about ensuring everyone has accurate information about the legal structures already in place regarding family assets. I think it's best we discuss the specifics in person rather than attempting to address complex matters by phone." The extended silence that followed suggested he was processing both my words and my tone, the unusual experience of his typically accommodating elder daughter establishing conversational boundaries. When he finally responded, his approach shifted to one I recognized from business negotiations, conciliatory language masking an attempt to regain informational advantage. "Of course we can discuss everything Saturday," he conceded with forced reasonableness. but perhaps you could send over whatever documentation you're referring to beforehand. It would help us prepare for a more productive conversation. I understand that perspective, I acknowledged, but the information is best presented comprehensively and in context. I'll arrive Friday evening as planned, and we can have a preliminary discussion before Saturday's family meeting. Another silence. Followed longer this time, before my father sighed audibly. Fine. Your mother is preparing the lake house guest rooms for both you and Elise. Dinner will be at 7 on Friday. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. After ending the call, I reflected on the interaction with analytical detachment. My father's attempt to obtain advance information suggested growing concern about the potential impact of my discoveries. His rapid shift from confrontational questioning to negotiation tactics indicated uncertainty about his position. Unusual. For a man accustomed to maintaining authority in both professional and family contexts. Most significantly, his acceptance of my boundary regarding information disclosure represented a subtle but meaningful shift in our established dynamic. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, I had maintained my position in the face of his attempted assertiveness, and he had ultimately acquiesced rather than escalating. This small interaction provided encouraging evidence that the approaching recalibration of family roles might proceed more constructively than I had initially anticipated. While I harbored no illusions about the potential for resistance or conflict, this conversation suggested at least the possibility of reasonable adjustment once the full legal reality was established. Friday morning arrived with a sense of purposeful anticipation. I had arranged to work remotely, completing essential professional responsibilities by early afternoon to allow ample time for final preparation and the drive to the lake house. Victoria had delivered the completed presentation materials the previous evening. An impressive portfolio of clearly organized legal documentation, financial analysis, and historical records that transformed complex information into accessible formats. As I packed my car for the return journey to Lake Charlevoix, I experienced none of the trepidation or emotional turmoil that had accompanied the previous week's trip. Last Friday, I had departed as the wounded daughter seeking inclusion and recognition. Today, I returned as the appointed steward of a family legacy, equipped with both legal authority and ethical purpose. The transformation wasn't merely one of legal standing, but of fundamental perspective. My grandmother's trust, both the legal instrument and the philosophical confidence, had shifted my understanding from personal rejection to appointed responsibility. The weekend ahead would bring necessary recalibration of long-established family dynamics, but the foundation for this adjustment had been carefully prepared through Eleanor's foresight and my own strategic implementation. The highway stretched before me toward northern Michigan, a familiar route now carrying new significance. Unlike last week's journey toward uncomfortable revelation, today's drive represented movement toward rightful restoration, not merely of asset control, but of the values-based stewardship my grandmother had entrusted specifically to my care. The familiar winding road leading to the Winters Lake House appeared in the golden light of early evening, the property's Victorian silhouette emerging through the pines as I approached. Spring had advanced noticeably in the week since my last visit, with early wildflowers dotting the woodland floor and buds swelling on the trees. Nature's cycle of renewal seemed particularly appropriate, given the transformation I was about to initiate in our family's dynamics. I parked beside my father's Range Rover. Elise's vehicle was notably absent, confirming she hadn't arrived yet for tomorrow's meeting. This timing aligned perfectly with my strategy, providing the opportunity for a preliminary discussion with my parents before the full family conversation. The quiet surrounding the property suggested my parents were inside rather than enjoying the lakefront patio or gardens, despite the pleasant spring weather. Gathering my overnight bag and the portfolio of documents Victoria had prepared, I approached the front entrance with measured steps. Unlike last Friday's arrival, burdened with olive oil, chocolates, and misguided hopes for recognition, today I carried only what was essential: the documentation establishing legal reality and my own clear understanding of both authority and responsibility. Before I could knock, the door opened to reveal my mother, her expression a complex mixture of social graciousness and underlying tension. "Rebecca, you're right on time," she greeted me, leaning forward to offer a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "Your father's in his study, reviewing some project specifications. Dinner won't be for another hour." "That's perfect," I replied, maintaining professional composure while matching her social courtesy. "I'd like to speak with both of you before we eat, if that's convenient." A flicker of concern crossed her features before she masked it with practiced politeness. "Of course, I'll let Richard know you've arrived. Would you like to freshen up first?" "No need. I'll meet you both in the library in 10 minutes. The brief surprise in her expression at my directness was quickly concealed. Typically, I would have followed her suggested sequence without question, accommodating family patterns even in small interactions. This subtle assertion of my own priorities represented the first of many recalibrations that would unfold over the weekend. "As you wish. I'll bring some tea," she offered, maintaining the ritualized hospitality that had long served as her mechanism for managing family tensions. The library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furnishings, and views of both the lake and the gardens, had served as the setting for significant family discussions across generations. My grandfather had announced his retirement here. My parents had revealed their engagement to the family in this room. My grandmother had gathered us all to discuss her cancer diagnosis within these walls. The space carried the weight of family history, making it the appropriate setting for today's consequential conversation. I placed the document portfolio on the mahogany conference table that occupied one end of the room, arranging materials precisely while awaiting my parents' arrival. The preparation process had a centering effect, allowing me to maintain focus on strategic objectives rather than emotional undercurrents. My parents entered together 7 minutes later, presenting a united front as they had throughout my childhood, whenever addressing significant issues. My father's expression combined curiosity with the subtle defensiveness I recognized from challenging client meetings, his standard response when anticipating potential threats to his authority or position. My mother carried a silver tea service, the formal one reserved for important occasions, her social armor fully deployed. "Rebecca," my father began without preamble, "your mother mentioned you have documentation you want to discuss before dinner. What exactly is this about?" Direct and authoritative, his typical opening when attempting to establish dominance in a conversation. In previous interactions, I would have responded with immediate deference, providing information in the apologetic tone of someone justifying an unusual request. Today required a different approach. "I believe it's best if we all sit down first," I replied calmly, gesturing toward the arranged seating at the conference table. "The information I'm about to share represents a significant development regarding our family assets and governance." My mother's hands trembled slightly as she arranged teacups on the table, a barely perceptible tell that revealed her anxiety despite her composed exterior. My father maintained momentary eye contact, assessing my unexpected assertiveness before nodding once and taking his customary seat at the head of the table. I chose a position directly opposite him, rather than my usual place at the side, a physical repositioning that subtly signaled the shifting dynamic. As my mother finished serving tea with mechanical precision, I opened the portfolio and extracted the executive summary Victoria had prepared, a 3-page document that outlined the essential facts without overwhelming detail. "Last week, after returning to Chicago, I discovered documentation that significantly impacts the estate planning decisions you shared during our dinner," I began, maintaining professional composure while ensuring both clarity and directness. "This documentation reveals that certain family assets, specifically the lake house property and approximately 60% of the investment portfolio, are not actually held in your names, but are owned by the Eleanor Grace Winters family, Preservation Trust, established in 1986. I placed copies of the summary document before each of them, allowing a moment for this initial information to register. My father immediately picked up his copy, eyes narrowing as he scanned the contents with focused intensity. My mother's hand remained on her teacup, her gaze fixed on the document without actually reaching for it, as if delay might somehow prevent the information from becoming real. "This is preposterous," my father stated flatly after reviewing the first page. "The lake house has been in our name since Eleanor's death. We've been paying the property taxes and maintenance costs for years." "Actually," I corrected gently, "I've been covering the property taxes and maintenance costs through monthly transfers to the family account. As for the property title, the trust has held legal ownership since 1986, with you and Mom granted lifetime usage rights rather than actual ownership." I extracted the property deed from the portfolio, along with the trust transfer documentation executed in 1986, placing both before him. "You've been operating with apparent authority based on grandmother's decision not to actively contradict your assumptions during her lifetime. However, the legal reality established by these documents is quite different from those assumptions." My father's expression shifted from dismissive to troubled as he examined the property documentation, his extensive experience with real estate transactions allowing him to quickly recognize the legitimacy of the instruments. My mother, finally, reached for her copy of the summary, her movements uncharacteristically hesitant. "This can't be right," she murmured, scanning the document with growing distress. "Eleanor would have told us if she'd placed everything in trust. We discussed estate planning with her many times over the years. Grandmother's correspondence, which was included in the portfolio I discovered, indicates she made a deliberate choice not to discuss certain aspects of her estate planning with you," I explained, extracting several relevant letters from the portfolio. "She believed some recognitions needed to occur organically rather than through premature confrontation." My father set down the property documentation, his expression hardening into the defensive authority I recognized from professional challenges. "Even if this trust exists, and I'm not conceding that point without having our attorney review these documents, what relevance does it have to our current estate planning? Eleanor has been gone for 8 years. "The relevance is fundamental," I replied, maintaining steady eye contact. "According to the trust provisions, which remain legally binding, grandmother appointed me as successor trustee upon her death. This means I have held legal authority regarding these assets for the past 8 years, though I remained unaware of this appointment until discovering the portfolio last Friday night." I placed the trustee appointment documentation before him, the official certification with its notarized signatures and legal seals providing irrefutable evidence of this arrangement. My father stared at the document with the focused intensity of someone searching for weaknesses or oversights that might undermine its validity. My mother's reaction took a different form, confusion giving way to hurt as the implications registered. Why would Eleanor do this? Why wouldn't she tell any of us about these arrangements? Her letters explain her reasoning quite clearly, I answered, softening my tone slightly in response to her genuine distress. She believed in meritocratic stewardship rather than automatic inheritance. The trust was specifically designed to ensure family assets would be managed according to demonstrated commitment to responsible financial oversight rather than generational position or perceived need. I extracted my grandmother's letter addressed specifically to me, sharing selected passages that articulated her philosophy regarding family governance and asset preservation. As I read her elegant explanation of values-based stewardship and merit-determined succession, my mother's expression shifted from hurt to thoughtful recognition. That sounds like Eleanor, she acknowledged quietly. She always emphasized responsibility over entitlement. My father, having found no technical flaws in the trustee certification, shifted to his next line of defense. Even if this trust exists and you've technically been appointed trustee, the fact remains that these arrangements have been dormant for 8 years. We've been managing these assets without interference or objection. There's established precedent regarding abandoned fiduciary responsibilities. This objection revealed both his quick strategic thinking and his misunderstanding of trust law specifics, an area where Victoria's preparatory guidance proved invaluable. The trust provisions explicitly address trustee notification requirements, I explained, extracting the relevant section. As the document states, responsibility for ensuring proper notification of trustee appointment rests solely with the appointing authority or designated legal representative. In this case, that would have been grandmother's estate attorney, Harrison Blake. My father's expression changed subtly at the mention of this name, recognition mingled with sudden understanding. Blake handled Eleanor's estate settlement. He never mentioned any trust arrangements or trustee appointments during the probate process. According to grandmother's correspondence, that omission was deliberate rather than accidental, I continued, presenting a letter addressed to Blake dated just 3 months before her death. She specifically instructed him to maintain the trust's confidentiality until either I discovered the documentation independently or certain family situations arose that would necessitate disclosure. My mother set down her teacup with unusual abruptness, tea sloshing over the rim onto the polished table surface. So all these years, while we've been making decisions about family properties and investments, believing we had full authority to determine their future distribution, we've actually had no legal standing at all. Not exactly, I clarified, wanting to be precisely accurate despite the temptation to allow their misconception to stand uncorrected. You've had legitimate usage rights and certain decision-making authorities regarding day-to-day management. What you haven't had is disposition authority, the legal right to determine ultimate ownership or distribution through your estate planning. My father pushed back from the table slightly, a physical manifestation of his attempt to create psychological distance from information that fundamentally disrupted his understanding of family power dynamics. And I suppose Eleanor's trust specifies that everything should go to you instead of Elise. How convenient that you've discovered documentation that directly contradicts our estate decisions in your favor. The accusation of self-interest provided an important opportunity to clarify both the trust's actual provisions and my own intentions regarding their implementation. The trust doesn't specify me as the ultimate beneficiary, I corrected, extracting the relevant section. It establishes a merit-based assessment process for determining appropriate asset distribution among qualified descendants, specifically defining merit in terms of demonstrated financial responsibility, consistent contribution to family welfare, and genuine commitment to legacy preservation. I met my father's skeptical gaze directly, maintaining both composure and conviction. My role as trustee isn't to claim these assets for myself, but to ensure they're ultimately distributed according to grandmother's established criteria rather than automatic inheritance or perceived need. And you get to make that determination? He challenged, skepticism evident in his tone. As trustee, yes, I have legal authority to implement the assessment process according to the established criteria. However, the trust also provides for independent verification through a committee structure if family members dispute specific determinations. My mother, who had been absorbing this information with uncharacteristic quietness, finally spoke. What does this mean for our current estate planning? For the decisions we've already made regarding Elise? It means those decisions apply only to assets actually held in your names rather than trust property, I explained gently. The lake house, majority investment portfolio, and certain other assets specified in the trust documentation will be distributed according to grandmother's established criteria rather than your estate planning provisions. The implications settled heavily in the room as both my parents processed this fundamental recalibration of their understanding. My father's expression reflected calculation, the rapid assessment of options and potential counter-strategies that characterized his approach to professional challenges. My mother's revealed genuine distress as cherished assumptions dissolved in the face of documented reality. I'll need our attorney to review all of this documentation, my father finally stated, reasserting authority through procedural requirements. Of course, I agreed readily. I've prepared complete copies of all relevant documents for professional review. Additionally, I've arranged for Victoria Harrington, a trust specialist from Chicago, to join us for tomorrow's family meeting to address any technical questions about trust provisions or implementation requirements. The mention of external legal representation clearly surprised him, suggesting he had anticipated handling this situation through family discussion controlled by his established authority. The introduction of independent expertise represented another recalibration of our typical approach to significant decisions. My mother glanced toward the grandfather clock in the corner of the library, her attention to timekeeper duties representing a retreat to familiar routines amid disorienting revelations. It's nearly time for dinner. Perhaps we should continue this discussion afterward? Actually, I responded with gentle firmness, I believe it's important we establish shared understanding of these fundamental legal realities before engaging in social interaction. The documentation I've presented establishes the actual governance structure for significant family assets. This understanding should inform all subsequent discussions regarding family financial planning and inheritance decisions. My father studied me with new awareness, recognizing that the daughter who had consistently deferred to parental authority despite professional achievement and financial independence had been replaced by someone operating from established legal authority and clear purpose. The shift was subtle but profound, not assertiveness for its own sake, but the appropriate exercise of appointed responsibility. What exactly do you want, Rebecca? He asked finally, setting aside procedural objections for direct engagement, with core objectives. The question presented an opportunity to establish the fundamental difference between my approach and what they had anticipated. I don't want anything in the sense you mean, I explained truthfully. My objective isn't personal acquisition, but appropriate implementation of grandmother's established governance structure. She created a sophisticated system for ensuring family assets would be preserved through merit-based stewardship rather than automatic inheritance or need-based distribution. My responsibility as trustee is to honor that system's purpose and provisions. The grandfather clock in the library chimed 7 times, its resonant tones marking not just the dinner hour, but the transition from revelation to reflection. My parents sat in momentary silence, the documentation spread before them representing a fundamental restructuring of their understanding regarding family governance and asset control. We should move to the dining room, my mother finally said, her instinctive retreat to social ritual providing familiar structure amid disorienting information. The roast will be overcooked. Catherine, my father interjected with unusual gentleness. I believe the current discussion takes precedence over dinner schedules. This small deviation from established patterns, my father prioritizing substantive conversation over my mother's carefully orchestrated social choreography, revealed the significant impact of the revelations. Throughout their 45-year marriage, he had consistently deferred to her authority regarding household matters while she supported his decision-making in financial and professional realms. This momentary role reversal signaled their mutual recognition that ordinary patterns were inadequate for extraordinary circumstances. You're right, of course, she conceded, settling back into her chair with visible effort toward composure. This is clearly more important than dinner timing. My father turned his attention back to me, his expression reflecting both strategic calculation and genuine puzzlement. I still don't understand why Eleanor would create this elaborate trust structure without informing us. We had a close relationship. She was actively involved in our estate planning discussions over the years. The question revealed an important gap in his understanding, one I could now address with the historical context provided by my grandmother's correspondence. According to her letters, she did attempt to discuss her philosophy about merit-based asset transfer several times, particularly after you and Mom began treating Elise differently than you had me during childhood. I explained, extracting a specific letter from 1997 that documented one such conversation. However, she found you consistently dismissed her concerns about creating imbalanced expectations and entitlement patterns. I offered him the letter, which described in my grandmother's elegant handwriting a particular discussion following Elise's 16th birthday, when our parents had gifted her a new car despite her failing grades and recent disciplinary issues at school. The letter detailed my grandmother's attempt to discuss the potential long-term consequences of rewarding irresponsible behavior with increased privileges and resources. My father scanned the letter, recognition dawning in his expression. I remember this conversation. I told her that different children require different parenting approaches, and that Elise needed encouragement rather than the strict structure that had worked well for you. Grandmother's concern wasn't about parenting styles, but about the messages being communicated regarding responsibility and consequence, I noted. She believed strongly that resources should flow toward demonstrated stewardship capacity rather than perceived need or emotional appeal. My mother, who had been examining another letter from the correspondence section, looked up with an expression of dawning comprehension. She tried to tell us this, didn't she? All those comments about earning privileges and merit-based opportunities that we interpreted as old-fashioned strictness. She was actually expressing her fundamental philosophy about family governance. Exactly, I confirmed. After multiple attempts at direct discussion proved ineffective, she determined that the trust structure would ensure her philosophy was implemented even if you chose a different approach during your lifetime. My father gathered the documents into a neat stack, a physical manifestation of his attempt to organize the challenging information into manageable components. So what happens now? What specifically does this mean for our current situation and plans? The question represented important progress, moving from resistance and disbelief toward practical engagement with the new reality. I recognized this transition as an opportunity to establish constructive dialogue rather than adversarial positioning. Several things need to happen, I explained, drawing on Victoria's strategic guidance regarding implementation sequence. First, formal acknowledgement of the trust's existence and provisions, something we're addressing through this discussion and tomorrow's family meeting. Second, comprehensive review of trust assets and status after 8 years of inadvertent non-compliance with certain administrative requirements. Third, development of a forward-looking governance approach that honors both the letter and spirit of grandmother's established framework. And our estate planning decisions regarding Elise? My mother asked, returning to her central concern. Those decisions remain valid for assets actually under your control, which include your personal accounts, the Scottsdale condominium, and approximately 40% of the investment portfolio, I clarified. For trust assets, distribution will ultimately be determined according to grandmother's established criteria rather than perceived need or automatic inheritance. My father leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from defensive to analytical. These criteria, demonstrated financial responsibility, contribution to family welfare, commitment to legacy preservation, they're somewhat subjective, aren't they? Who determines how these qualities are measured or compared? The question revealed his strategic mind engaging with the governance framework rather than simply rejecting its existence, another positive development in the conversation's evolution. The trust provides specific assessment methodologies including quantitative metrics and qualitative evaluation procedures, I explained, extracting the relevant section from the documentation. Financial responsibility is measured through concrete factors like debt-to-income ratios, consistent savings behaviors, and evidence-based decision-making. Family contribution encompasses both financial support and non-monetary investments in family welfare. Legacy preservation includes both material maintenance of family assets and philosophical alignment with core values. As I outlined these measurement approaches, I observed subtle shifts in both my parents' expressions, recognition dawning that these weren't arbitrary or manipulable criteria, but comprehensive assessment frameworks designed to identify genuine stewardship capacity. "And if we disagree with your assessment as trustee?" my father inquired, exploring potential limitations to my authority. "The trust provides for an independent review committee consisting of the family attorney, a financial advisor not currently engaged with family members, and an objective third party with relevant expertise," I replied. "This structure ensures checks and balances within the governance system, while maintaining focus on the established criteria rather than emotional appeals or traditional hierarchies." My mother's gaze moved toward the windows overlooking the lake, the darkening waters reflecting the same transformation occurring in our family's understanding. What had appeared solid and certain revealed as more fluid and complex than previously recognized. "I always thought I understood Eleanor," she said quietly. "We were close for over 40 years. How could I have missed something this fundamental about her approach to family legacy?" The question contained genuine pain rather than defensive. Denial. An opening for compassionate clarification rather than adversarial positioning. "I don't believe you missed it entirely," I offered gently. Grandmother's philosophy was evident in countless interactions and decisions throughout her lifetime. What might have been less visible was her determination to ensure this philosophy survived beyond her personal influence through structured governance rather than mere suggestion or example. My father, who had been reviewing additional trust provisions while we spoke, looked up with an expression of reluctant admiration. "This is remarkably thorough work. The trust anticipates virtually every potential objection or circumvention attempt, with specific countermeasures and enforcement mechanisms. It's essentially litigation-proof." His assessment, coming from someone with extensive experience in complex property transactions and legal structures, represented significant validation of the trust's technical soundness. More importantly, his tone suggested transition from resistance toward recognition, the beginning of acceptance regarding the new governance reality. Grandmother worked with specialized counsel over several decades to refine the structure, I acknowledged. The current version represents the culmination of careful development rather than a hasty arrangement. "But why you?" he asked suddenly, the question containing complex layers of meaning. "Why appoint you as trustee rather than a professional administrator or neutral third party?" The question penetrated to the core uncertainty behind his resistance, not just the adjustment of asset control, but the specific transfer of authority to his daughter, reversing the established hierarchy that had defined our relationship throughout my life. "Her correspondence addresses this decision explicitly," I replied, extracting the letter that had most moved me during my initial review, a document written just 6 months before her death, when she knew her time was limited. "I have observed Rebecca's development with particular attention throughout her life," I read aloud from my grandmother's elegant script. "Beyond her professional achievements and financial acumen, she demonstrates the essential quality required for true stewardship, the capacity to maintain balance between authority and responsibility, between preservation and adaptation, between individual achievement and collective welfare. These balanced perspectives are rare in any generation, but particularly valuable in navigating the complex intersection of family legacy and changing circumstances." My mother's eyes glistened with unexpected moisture as these words filled the library, recognition of both my grandmother's clear-eyed assessment and the daughter she had often overlooked while focusing on Elise's more demanding presence. "She saw you very clearly," my mother acknowledged softly, "more clearly than we sometimes have." This simple acknowledgement contained more meaningful recognition than any previous parental praise, an admission not just of my capabilities, but of their own limited perspective. The moment represented a small but significant recalibration in our relationship, a shift from the parent-child dynamic toward adult-to-adult engagement based on genuine recognition rather than established roles. My father, less comfortable with emotional territory, returned to practical considerations. Tomorrow's meeting with Elise will be challenging. She's built certain expectations regarding inheritance that this information completely disrupts. I've anticipated that challenge, I assured him. Victoria Harrington, the trust specialist who will join us tomorrow, has extensive experience with family systems as well as legal expertise. She can help facilitate productive discussion about philosophical purpose rather than merely technical requirements. And your own objectives regarding Elise specifically? My mother inquired with characteristic directness when family protection was concerned. She's still your sister, regardless of legal frameworks or assessment criteria. The question offered an important opportunity to clarify my approach to trustee responsibilities, not as a mechanism for retaliation or advantage, but as a framework for appropriate stewardship across generations. My objective is implementation of grandmother's established system, not predetermined outcomes regarding any specific family member, I explained truthfully. The assessment process is designed to identify and reward genuine stewardship capacity, wherever it exists. If Elise demonstrates the qualities grandmother valued, she'll receive appropriate recognition through asset allocation. If she doesn't currently meet those criteria, the system includes development opportunities rather than simple exclusion. This explanation seemed to reassure my mother, her protective instincts regarding Elise momentarily satisfied by the inclusion of development pathways rather than absolute determination. My father's expression remained more calculated, suggesting ongoing assessment of strategic implications rather than immediate acceptance. We should move to dinner, he finally stated, gathering the documents into a neat stack and rising from his chair. We'll need clear heads and sufficient energy for tomorrow's discussion. This practical suggestion reflected his typical approach to complex challenges, ensuring basic needs were addressed to maintain optimal function during extended problem-solving. It also signaled his recognition that immediate resolution was neither possible nor advisable, creating space for reflection and adaptation before the more complicated family meeting ahead. As we moved toward the dining room, I observed subtle shifts in both posture and interaction patterns that revealed the initial impact of our conversation. My father, typically dominating physical and conversational space, moved with slightly less certainty. My mother, usually orchestrating social choreography with confident precision, glanced toward me occasionally as if recalibrating her understanding of my position within the family system. The elegant dining room, with its lake views now visible only as distant lights reflected on dark water, welcomed us with the familiar comfort of tradition. Fine china, crystal glassware, silver candlesticks casting warm light across the polished mahogany table. Yet even this carefully maintained setting now carried new significance as trust property rather than personal possession. A physical manifestation of the governance reality we were just beginning to process. I hope you're still partial to roast beef, my mother commented as we settled into our places, reaching for familiar social patterns amid unfamiliar relational territory. Some preferences remain consistent despite changing circumstances, I replied with a small smile, accepting her attempt at establishing momentary normalcy through shared family history. As my father poured wine with characteristic precision, his gaze met mine with newfound awareness, not just of my trustee authority, but of the underlying qualities that had prompted my grandmother's selection. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, he was seeing me not as his achievement-oriented daughter, but as Eleanor Winter's chosen successor, entrusted with preserving a legacy that transcended individual preferences or immediate circumstances. To Eleanor, he said unexpectedly, raising his glass in a toast, who clearly saw further than the rest of us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.